All right, 5 after. We can go ahead and get started. Welcome, panelists and everyone in the audience. Thank you for being here for this Epic's election panel. Quick intro from me. I'm Connor. You may recognize me as the recap podcast guy. I've moderated previous panels, and I'm going to be moderating today's panel again. The format is the same. Some questions will be addressed individually, and I'm going to call on each of you randomly to make sure everyone has a chance to answer. And others are going to be open to the floor for a debate-style discussion where anyone can chime in. We're going to ask again that everybody please keep their answers to under a minute, since we have 9 candidates and a bunch of questions to get through. So if you're going over time, you're going to hear this sound. And that means it's time for closing thoughts and to wrap your answer up. So we can go ahead and get started. As usual, we're going to start with brief introductions just to get to know each of the candidates. Question 1, please introduce yourself and give a brief statement on what unique experiences or views you bring to the Spartan Council. TerraBellus, we'll hear from you first.
Hi, everybody. I'm TerraBellus, a long-time community member, having come into Synthetix in early 2020. I'm a sitting Spartan Councillor. I think over the course of my tenure, I've submitted over 10 SIPs or SCCPs, and slightly over half of those have been accepted. So I consider myself to be well versed in the protocol, its various mechanisms and mechanics. For example, I'm also currently researching the transition to B3 and have proposed tokenomics for the SNX token that potentially, with the rest of the Spartan Council's approval, would provide a means of carrying SNX value forward. I came into crypto about 2017, became kind of full-time involved in crypto, I think mid last year, after having completed a PhD in the social sciences. Thanks for having me.
Great, Tara. Thanks. Great to see you back. Ethernaut, your introduction, please.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I've been CC for over 2 years. I'm Argentinian, so I'm sorry, but I'm going to do the cliche of using a soccer analogy. Basically, I'm like the technical goalkeeper right now, and my objective is to protect the goal while the talented guys in the team ship B3. That's basically what I'm trying to do. This would be my third epoch, right? And I've been doing exactly the same thing, trying to wrap up B2X and trying to ship B3 for the past 2 epochs. And in this one, we just need to go to production. Basically, everything's ready, everything's being audited, and I just want to be around to make sure that we succeed in that process. I'm not very versed in finance, to be honest, but I am very versed in smart contracts and programming. So yeah, that will be my contribution this epoch.
Thank you, Ethernaut. Thank you for sharing your experience with the group. Jordi, your introduction, please.
Hi, guys. Good to be with you. So I guess a little bit the opposite. I am quite versed in finance and not as versed in Synthetix smart contracts. I run a rather large market making firm called Selene Capital, which I founded. I'm quite involved in DeFi for the last 2 years. I advise several projects. I've been doing angel investing. I understand the fundamental concepts that Synthetix is trying to build upon extremely well, and looking forward to possibly working with you guys on refining the new ideas you have for B3.
Thank you, Jordi, and welcome. Adam, your introduction, please.
Hello, Adam Cochran, current counsel, Thread Maxi. You love me or you hate me. I'm aware there's not a lot of in between. In terms of my views for Synthetix, I can sum up a platform in under a minute. with what I call the 6 Ps: profits, preference, partners, placements, and epoch. Profits use a Synthetix holder, take on government risk and protocol risk. You need to be rewarded for that and not undercut. If we sacrifice that, we are sacrificing the protocol entirely. In preference, Synthetix needs to be collateral in V3. It can be conservative, it can be a minority of that collateral, has to be there, cannot be removed. On partners, we need to focus all of our resources on developing market frameworks for partner integrations. Partners have driven hundreds of millions in volumes. We can make that hundreds of billions by prioritizing them over first-party offerings. Placements, we cannot be bound to optimism anymore. V3 needs to prioritize aggressive deployment across all EVMs by the end of next cycle. And epochs, it's pronounced epochs, not epics, and I will die on that hill. Thank you.
That might be the most contentious thing you said. Thank you, Adam. Danny, your introduction, please.
Well, thanks for making me follow Adam there, Connor. Appreciate it. Well, hey, everyone. Current council member, professionally, I guess I've done it all from various BD roles to most recently have a lot of experience in product operations on the crypto side. Got into crypto in 2017, but been a Synthetix staker since 2020. I'm a user of basically all the Synthetix ecosystem partners across Quenta, Lyra, Overtime, et cetera, et cetera. Call me stupid or call me a believer, but something like a quarter of my net worth today is in SNX. So you can be sure that a goal of mine is to keep the value prop of SNX high. And then I spend a good amount of my time writing threads and just educating crypto Twitter on kind of what's going on in the ecosystem and what people can look forward to in the future.
Thank you, Danny. Millie, your introduction, please.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. I'm Millie. I've been a longtime Synthetix community member. I've been part of the Synthetix community since probably 2020. I've been a DAO participant going on 2 years now since I would say early 2021, really early 2021, since about February. So going on 2 years now, I've been part of the Ambassador Council, led essentially a lot of initiatives there, a lot of integrations. I saw firsthand how much demand there is to build on top of Synthetix as an ambassador. I have a lot of connections to different projects. I'm an active DeFi delegate in general. I have a lot of familiarity with most of the ETH DeFi ecosystem, and I'm somewhat well versed on other non-EVM DeFi communities as well. I really have my ear to the streets, or ear to the chain, I should say, when it comes to DeFi. I basically follow all the latest updates, everything that's happening in real time, pretty much full time, which you would call full-time DeFi. There's rarely anything that happens that I don't that goes by me. And then on the Synthetix side, I've contributed to a lot of proposals outside of what I've done with ambassadors. I've also I'm pretty well versed. I would say I wouldn't, maybe not as well versed as Ethernaut or an Afif or a Cav, but I'm pretty well versed in Synthetix on the contract side, like what their contracts are aiming to do. I'm not very technical myself, but I do understand essentially the objectives. I know all the pain points of Synthetix, having contributed for over 2 years now. I know where the bottlenecks are, where the pressure points are, where the biggest issues that we face are, and then some of the more philosophical issues that protocols and DeFi protocols in general just face. I relate to those really well. I understand how to solve for them in the long term, and so yeah, that's basically the extent of my involvement with Synthetix.
Thank you, Millie. Funk, we'll hear from you next.
Start Ethernaut. Congrats on the World Cup win. I'm sure you were over the moon with that as a native Argentinian. So to introduce myself, I've been in crypto, it feels like forever. I remember reading the Ethereum white paper, not understanding it at all, and then kind of surprising myself by how deep I got into DeFi in the end, really, despite all of that. My background is in tech with a finance and economics slant to that. And really, my sort of understanding and background with the Synthetix protocol comes through where I spend most of my time, which is with the Keeper protocol and Fix4x. I started out there as a community member and I'm now a full-time member of the team. For those of you that don't know what Fix4x is, we rely on Synthetix for every single one of our liquidity pools. So our fate is entirely entwined with Synthetix. And I think that's quite atypical of partner protocols that work with the Synthetix platform and protocol. And I think that I could add a really valuable perspective to the Spartan Council because of that partnership slant that I bring to things. And I think as we kind of set off on the journey for V3, that becomes even more critical for what Synthetix is trying to achieve.
Thank you, Funk. Welcome, and great to have you here. Cavalier, your introduction, please.
Hey, everyone. I'm Cav. You might recognize me from the weekly Spartan Council sync calls. Been a CC at Synthetix for about a year now in product. Been in crypto a couple of years, and before that, started and grown some tech startups. The unique perspective I bring is probably being a product CC at Synthetix, helping deliver on what we want to build and what the community wants us to build, and choosing the right people and the resource allocation to get there, or at least influencing that. I think that gives me, two interesting conclusions. The first one is that Synthetix is building something pretty revolutionary, and we've been building that for more than a year, since even before I joined. A large majority of the horsepower at Synthetix has been going towards things like Perps v2 and the protocol v3, which, while it's in the works, still hasn't come to fruition yet. And so I'm running this epoch because I think it's important that token holders have the opportunity to vote in someone who's quite close to the protocol. I think a mix of governance of members who are in the weeds day to day, people like Caleb, people like Ethernaut, and potentially myself, is really important to be part of the governance process, as well as people who bring external perspectives. So I think with Synthetix building V3, we're going to have as bigger or potentially bigger impact than some of the triggering changes that kicked off DeFi a couple of years ago. And I think we need a range of perspectives, including highly aligned and in the trenches people from in the protocol.
Thanks, Cav. Cyberduck, your introduction, please.
Hi guys, Duck here. So I've been part of the Synthetix community for a couple of years now. I think since the sub $1 days, which I hope and believe we won't ever revisit again. I'm a former member of the first Spartan Council that has happened back in the days, and a long-term continuous serving member of the Grants Council, where built and funded plenty of great things. I have also contributed to a handful of proposals at Synthetix, Quenta, Thales, where at Thales I'm also currently on the council. My non-crypto background is business management, currently running a Web2 dev agency for a decade right now. Lately, I have had quite an interest in V3. I've spent a significant amount of time studying the V3 specs, as one of my aspirations has been to develop an alternative staking frontend for V3 as part of decentralization, which is currently on hold, blame it on the bears. Anyway, for this purpose, I have had an annoying number of questions directed at Noah, for which I apologize. But that has helped me better comprehend some of the nuances of V3 from UX perspective. All in all, the doors that V3 opens is really exciting, and I'm looking forward to that. Lastly, obviously, I'm a degen, and that's an obvious trait here. And I have a dog that occasionally barks on these calls, so I apologize for that. Turning the floor over to someone else.
Thank you, Duck. Great to have you here. Moving on to, I think we heard from everybody. Moving on to question 2. Question 2 is going to be open to the group and is kind of just an open reflection on contentious decisions made this past epoch. So first, would you support switching off Pyth oracles if Chainlink released a suitable fast oracle? And second, do you think SNX monetary policy decisions were overly restrictive? Just a reminder, all questions in this panel were submitted by community members. The floor is open for discussion.
I think if oracles were superseded in quality by Chainlink and therefore only represented an increased risk surface, it would make sense objectively to turn them off. Though I think they can provide two different services concurrently. So I don't anticipate it being, from a risk perspective, kind of self-evident necessity to do so.
Yeah, I think if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Nonetheless, depending on whether those Chainlink oracles provide a significant improvement in terms of latency or reliability, it might be worth considering, making that switch, assuming the benefits outweigh the status quo of the Pyth oracles and the added cost of making that change. And I also think that alternatively, for the purpose of redundancy and risk management, it might also be viable to consider having another oracle as a fallback.
To a certain extent, I'd agree with that, right? But it kind of comes from a little bit of a different perspective from my end. And I think it's where I'd kind of highlight is that I think we all know that Chainlink has been subsidizing oracles for DeFi for the last 3 years. Stands to reason at some point that's going to come to an end, and the cost is kind of hit all of us in the space. And so it would only be wise to start to cultivate alternatives and kind of look at it through that lens. But obviously, all the quality stuff holds true, and agree completely with that.
There's also an argument for maintaining a cozier relationship with Chainlink. I'm just kind of applying an alternative perspective to what you've just said, but maintaining a cozier relationship for when they do turn on the costs or turn up the costs is an arguable point of view.
I think what I would say is that I think, for the most part, Chainlink has proven to be very reliable over the years. And obviously they have like a really solid seat on the throne, I would say, in the Oracle game. I think it's good to have some competition, and in industry, every industry needs competition. Otherwise, the monopoly can get ahead of itself. So I think, the fact that we did switch to Pyth oracles for the time being was probably for practicality reasons. But I would be very much in support of like moving back to Chainlink, or at least transitioning back to Chainlink once their new solution goes live. I say this because, on the technical level, there are some limitations with Pyth oracles. They have their own chain, and people could observe that sort of chain, the Pyth chain, and front run or some price feeds on on Optimism mainnet. So there are some areas where you would probably want an oracle that has just a better track record of dealing with that kind of stuff. And then on the other side of things, there's like a cozy relationship between, Pyth and certain entities within the space, as well as like certain, their main market is mainly Solana right now. Solana is very centralized. They also have a very cozy relationship with Jump that I think is probably not wise to depend on too much. So I think there's a lot of nuances to it when you get into it. I would be very happy to switch back to Chainlink once their product goes live. I also understand that we've worked closely with them throughout the years, and especially recently in development of this product. So I would definitely want to see that come to fruition, and I think we should continue pushing the Oracle space forward as we have been for a long time. And so by doing that, we sort of just explored this option with Pyth recently, but I would be very open to go back to Chainlink.
I don't know if it's actually our responsibility to make the decision. Part of me thinks that we should frame this from a point of view of having an objective test for safety of oracles. And if we believe that those oracles can meet a certain safety standard, enabling them within Synthetix as a infrastructure protocol and letting each individual market operator decide which oracles are the right fit for their product and their risk profile. And we can change the levels of collateral or risk payments or fee payments back to Synthetix in order to cover any skewed risk that we might see. But I think if we want to be sort of protocol to protocol infrastructure, we need to move away from cementing decisions at the protocol level and being able to provide well-managed choice across risk.
That's a good point, and I think that's one of the benefits of V3, which something that we don't really enjoy yet, but that modularity, level of modularity will come, will be enabled by V3. So I'm excited to see that.
I think a lot about resilience, and I think that plays out in two ways. I think it's healthy to have competition, and I think it's healthy for the protocol long term to have multiple choices, especially as we shift towards an ecosystem. That said, we've got an incredible relationship with Chainlink, and it extends far before my time, and I hope that continues. But I think retaining choice for the protocol, for partners, in the interest of resilience is important, and naturally the better solutions would rise to the top.
Connor, I realized that none of us answered your second question, so maybe I'll pivot it back to the restrictive policy for us. I think one of the challenges in this question is that we as individuals operating within a protocol and using it can feel that these were restrictive monetary policies, and we're in a climate right now where everything's a restrictive monetary policy, and we're acutely aware of those challenges. But I'm not sure that we can make the judgment of these things being overly restrictive in the sense that the protocol still stands, right? We're weeks away from V3, and I think maintaining the safety that Synthetix has a multi-year long track record on is absolutely paramount at this point. We know our liquidity is going to drop. It's dried up across the ecosystem. We're transitioning. We're not having as many rewards or promotions pushed into the ecosystem. We're going to be lower liquidity. Until V3, safety becomes paramount, because if we had a sell-off here or a Luna-like fiasco, that's it. V3's toast. No one's coming back to give it a try. So do I think they were overly conservative fiscal policy decisions that were made this cycle? Absolutely. I think they were overly restrictive, not for the goals that we're hoping to achieve, and they won't move forward to V3 in the same way. So I think they were conservative, but essential for what we want to achieve.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that. I'm in agreement. Yeah, I mean, monetary policy was definitely restrictive. You could justify it from the risk assessment we've made. Though, when I look back at it, some of those, C ratio increases forced plenty of stakers that were managing their debt correctly to burn their debt for the sake of increasing the average protocol C ratios, because some other players in the protocol were not behaving correctly as they should. And this undoubtedly did restrict the liquidity of SUSD and added extra friction for traders to onboard onto Quenta and so on and so on. So yes, we were already restrictive. Maybe we could have played it better.
So I just have a question back at you, Connor. By restrictive monetary policy, are you referring to like the collateral ratios and those kind of decisions of like SNX staking it? Or do you refer to like the incentives? Because in the monetary policy for Synthetix wasn't at all restrictive, right? The monetary policy for 2022 was very inflationary. It was very like I wouldn't say the monetary policy was restrictive, but I would say like the parameterization was somewhat restrictive. But I would remind people that it wasn't so restrictive in comparison to like historical collateral ratios, right? And when I first joined Synthetix community in 2020, it was the collateral ratio for staking SNX was 750%. And I think it just came down at that time from 800. So you could only mint 1/7 of your collateral value in terms of SUSD, right? And at one point it was even higher than that. So like, I just think, it's not really restrictive in terms of historical wise. It's actually in line with like how the protocol progressed, its sophistication, the resiliency. I mean, I would argue that it wasn't very restrictive. And then from a monetary policy perspective, it definitely wasn't restrictive. It was definitely like, very high inflationary environment, very accommodative to bring on new stakers. Whether it had the impact that it was supposed to or not, that's a separate topic. But I would say, monetary policy was definitely not restrictive for this period.
I mean, one of the decisions that kind of prompted a lot of the later contention when C ratios were risen were around a choice to lower the C ratio in light of a SIP that was going to result in liquidation. So in that way, we were relatively flexible. The council that voted in the lowering of 400 to 300 in the C ratio in order to cater to that acquired debt from liquidations. So I see where it is coming from in saying we weren't actually as restrictive as might appear from the contention that has followed.
If I could just add one other thing there, I think, I also very much relate with people that feel like there is like really harsh penalties for, liquidations and sort of some of the recent steps taken to mitigate risks around the liquidations and cascades. I think, for the most part, you need to have followed the protocol long enough to understand where like these issues come from. Like the idea of how the protocol was designed 2-3 years ago is like night and day different than basically what we have today, right? Like at the time, there wasn't as much activity, using synths as there are now. At the time when a lot of these decisions were made, there wasn't a whole lot of lingering escrow rewards, right? Escrow, and when it was at its highest peak of inflation was like in 2018, 2019, it ended up having like a ton of like SNX locked away without a real means by which to liquidate it. And so like now we're dealing with a lot of these mistakes of the past, and like we basically have to make decisions to account for these without letting them become like existential to the protocol. And I feel like I get people's like frustrations with SNX being collateral and it being restrictive and the liquidation penalties being really high, but really we're just dealing with mistakes of the past, right? If SNX becoming like primary collateral, having all these escrow inflation, all of this sort of put a lot of pressure on the protocol in the long term. And I feel like, we're kind of paying for the price of it now. And I sort of, I do relate. I understand the people that kind of bought into that idea, and, they're kind of paying for it now. I relate to that, but, we need to understand that those were mistakes made before, and we need to work to rectify those for V3. And also, like Adam said earlier, make sure that it doesn't bring on risk at the current time.
Thank you, Millie. Anyone have anything else to add before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I'll just throw in one bit, right? Which is, as a kind of outsider looking in at the protocol for a long time, the way you guys manage risk in general, I think, is to be applauded. And to kind of dovetail on a couple of the other comments, I think as a use case of a protocol changes, you have to look at monetary policy holistically. And I think we can all agree there's a bunch of opportunity to do that as we go into V3 anyway.
And just one like very general point. If there's an option to move away from Pyth into Chainlink, I would say that should be the default, and Pyth should be kind of more of a backup, just based on, some of the points made about, they're obviously it's extremely close to Jump. It's kind of built out of Jump, and I've worked with a lot of Solana teams that have had some issues with it before. It's kind of more of a, they're not super happy to be using it sometimes. It's obviously had issues. They had the infamous cropped meme issue where they gave some crazy prices in the early days. They didn't even realize that they should, be using medians instead of means on how they actually supply price. So I would say that Chainlink should be the default if it's possible.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Moving on to the next question. Question 3 will be for individual response. What do you want to see achieved by the council in the short to medium term, and where do you see the Synthetix protocol fitting into the DeFi space going forward? Cav, we'll hear from you first on this one.
Sure. I think the biggest shift is obviously moving from V2 to V3. That is going to take multiple months to wind down the V2 system and transition in a safe and sustainable way. That's the first thing. The second thing is shifting from what was originally a product offering fully through to an ecosystem offering. And that is attracting both stakers on the one side and protocols to build on Synthetix on the other side. The third one, really important, is revenue and being sustainable. I think Synthetix had a really important role in kicking off DeFi and some of the mechanisms that we used. And I think we've got an equally important role to shift towards sustainability. And now that we've got multiple functioning products with others coming, I think that's a real prospect for Synthetix to shift the conversation towards revenue and sustainability. So V2 to V3, product to ecosystem, and revenue and sustainability.
Thanks, Cav. Jordi, your response to this question, please.
Absolutely. So, in the few days I've had to kind of start going through a lot of the proposals, the things that I really like are definitely the B2B concept, the idea, for example, of letting other people, other protocols be able to spin up their own markets, their own ERPs. That's something that's quite different, indeed, than just trying to do it yourself. I think when it comes to oracles and oracle-based DEXs and things like that, I understand the downside quite well, and actually one of the upsides that I've been saying is that it does allow this kind of mechanic where you can fork infinite ones of them because you're not really like relying on centralized liquidity. You can have the liquidity be somewhere else and just sort of provide it through collateral instead of like needing the full order book to create price discovery. And if you're going to go down that route, then I think that the Synthetix approach of like allowing multiple communities to be able to find their own users, because in that sort of like scenario, what's really important is the users. And it actually brings me a lot of analogy from the poker days where like you can break up the value funnel into like multiple pieces, and the piece of it where you're actually having somebody build a community and find users who actually want to trade or use the product, you leave that to like somebody else that becomes like their priority, and you just become very good at providing the middleware, let's say. So that kind of aligns with a lot of the vision that I have. So looking forward to helping see that direction continue.
Thank you, Jordi. Cyberduck. Duck, your response to this question, please.
All right, so it's ultimately the transition to V3 in a smooth way, with a primary focus on expanding non-SNX collateralized liquidity, and thus making sure there's sufficient incentives to both create and LP in the pools and markets in V3. Through achieving this liquidity growth will improve both the protocol collateralization and as well as increase the liquidity that's a precursor to the growth of protocol revenues, be it in perps or other markets on V3, or other products built on top of them. At the same time, I believe we should also signal and lay a clear path and possibly a modular path of how we're going to increase the value accrual to SNX outside of it just being a collateral in the legacy market. So I think those are the things that we should tackle in the near term.
Thank you, Duck. Funk, your response, please.
Yeah, so I think what you're going to hear as a consistent theme is the transition to V3, right? So kind of let's put that to one side because I'm not really adding anything new there. But I would say that really for me, there's kind of two emphases that you can look on in the short to the medium term that really need to be a focus. And one of those is driving value through greater use of atomics and looking at what drives that holistically. So today, when we look at that, you see that sometimes that liquidity is fragmented. You also see that there's not enough of it. And what we're also kind of not really seeing the market react to is that the partners that integrate have a major incentive to make it work on their end. But as they view it today, they're kind of just looking at the Synthetix community to provide that liquidity and make it happen. And I think there's an open question that says, do the partners that we're integrating with have enough skin in the game on their side of the stack to take some responsibility for that? And that could be a major focus of the way that we engage with the partners in the future. So if we message that right, then that potential can be unlocked. And then I think The other thing to really focus on is making sure that as multiple types of collateral accepted, that really the incentives are well aligned along that. So really, in short, if you're going to add different types of collateral, you have to ask the question, are you going to reduce the amount of SNX that's under demand or under ask to be staked, right? And ideally, you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you lock up as much as possible, because then it has a direct impact on selling pressure of the token. So my idea there would be that you try and utilize LPing as much as possible to drive some of that collateral value, and making sure that SNX is part of the stack of that LP pair. And I think if you then kind of look at the rest of the incentives, that would help drive further value through utilization of value driving activity from synths, then you really need to make sure that that is lined up well. So I kind of think you do that in a couple of ways, right? You make sure it works for LPers, you make sure that it works for stakers, and you make sure that it works for the partners.
Final thoughts, Funk?
That was it. That was my finish.
All right, just in time. Thank you. Danny, your response to this question.
Yeah, like everyone said, migrating to V3, I think with sufficient incentives for attracting liquidity, I think while also solidifying the SNX value prop and tokenomics. I think we also need to focus on deepening SUSD liquidity across DeFi, which I think not only improves UX for the existing partners, but also incentivizes additional integrations and new protocols to be built using Synthetix liquidity as a platform. And I think once new protocols are built, it would be very, very difficult for them to move away, which I think just solidifies us for the long term. We also can't be in an environment where the lack of SUSD liquidity causes Gauntlet or any other organization like Gauntlet to recommend removing it as a collateral type for Aave, just as an example. And going forward, yeah, I think Synthetix will become the de facto liquidity layer for derivatives, not only on Ethereum, but across different chains. There's no doubt that the future is multi-chain. And we should own a big portion of the bridge market as well, all of which we'll be able to enable using CCIP whenever that comes out. But again, that's only possible with extremely deep SUSD liquidity. And I think the tokenomic structure in V3 and how we're incentivizing collateral providers to provide their collateral will kind of play into that.
Thanks, Danny. Millie?
Yeah, I guess, okay, what I would say is, for the most part, I think I really want to see V3 just play out. I want to see it in the wild. I really want to see how this, this new DeFi primitive functions. I had not too much of in a rush to make rash decisions on how the tokenomics should look, how the protocol governance should be shaped around it. I really just want to see V3 function and operate. And once it does, I'm pretty sure Synthetix, where it's going to be situated in DeFi, I think it's going to be situated in a really good place. And I say this as someone who, working on integrations all the time as an ambassador. I just see the demand for building on top of Synthetix and for, censorship resistant debt. And now that debt could be stable coins. It could be, for most protocols, it's just stable coins, but for Synthetix, it could be stable coins. It could be synths of other kinds. It could be anything, right? And essentially what Synthetix is generalized leverage. And generalized leverage is always in demand. It's never going to be out of demand. Everything in the world runs on leverage, right? Our mortgages run on leverage. Everything runs on leverage. And so this demand is just inherent in every market. And so there's very little that we will need to do to spur this demand, because it's always going to be there. What we need to do is try and meet it at all times. And it's difficult to meet it with, restrictive collaterals like Synthetix, right? Like SNX. We need a scalable form of collateral, and we need the protocol to be ticking and humming properly to, and then fits SNX in as, into that bigger picture. So I'm not in a rush there. I just want to see the protocol operate. And I think, where Synthetix is going to be situated is going to be in an excellent place. There is no other protocol that offers composable on-demand leverage. It just doesn't exist, right? Gearbox is kind of trying to do this right now, but they're manipulating spot leverage. They're not creating debt-based synthetic leverage, which is what we're doing. DYDX is the same thing, only they use an order book to create the leverage, right? And so you need a counterparty for every person who wants to take on a leverage position. With Synthetix, the counterparty is the LPs. And so, this demand for this kind of leverage is going to be infinite in the space. Like, it's never going to run out. Every protocol wants that capital efficiency of synthetic leverage. And the fact that we're going to be a liquidity layer offering this, it's just going to, we're going to be something like one of the main DeFi pillars, right? Before Synthetix was kind of SNX was considered like a part of the DeFi 1.0, but in a meme way. Now, like, I think SNX is going to be DeFi as like, a pillar of the ecosystem where Curve is, where Maker is, where Uniswap is.
Thank you, Millie. Adam, your response, please.
Yeah, sure. So I don't actually think it's about the V3 migration. That's happening. We know that. We know our priorities there that we have to solve around collateralization. And I don't think we can just sit back and hope for demand. I think we need to spend our time and focus on a clear basis of understanding what V3 is. And I think at the end of the day, Synthetix is this engine for collateralized risk management. We're not out here building a blog, we're building the WordPress of DeFi. And we need to abstract that complexity down to the lowest common denominator for partners. So you should be able to build a virtualized AMM or a perps market or an option market as easily as you can install a theme on WordPress or deploy an ERC20. Because if we power the next generation of DeFi by making it seamless for anyone to build, we allow rapid iterations of new deployments and experimentation where some of these are going to stick. We see it every time when AMMs come out, there's 1,000 forks and one or two of them have something novel. We want to capture those novel movements, and that means being easy and accessible. So I think if we are overly focused on markets that are complex integrations or margin amounts, we're going to lose the momentum that we need. But by lowering that kind of threshold of what we're building and making it trivial to build out and spin up these DeFi templates, essentially, will allow people to rapidly experiment and capture that market and kind of position Synthetix as the WordPress of DeFi.
Thank you, Adam. Tara, your response?
Okay, way in the back. So speaking practically, I think it would be great if in the next epoch, the SC can work with the core contributors to produce a document that really outlines the migration process to V3 in a holistic sense. We have a large number of SIPs that cover it from a technical perspective, but I think a large portion of the community is going to benefit from knowing how we're going to go from V2 to the V2 legacy market, the native collateral being minted on V3, and then following that, how the tokenomics of the SNX token are going to be integrated with that V3 system, because it's coming quickly, and that clarity I think could do a lot to make us more approachable. In the midterm, I would very much like to see the DAI wrapper unwound. I think it serves a great purpose in providing us liquidity when we really need it during this first launch of V2 and into the transition into V3. But once we have ETH as a collateral on V3 natively, producing the new version of the SUSD, currently SNXUSD token, it's serving a purpose. As far as where the place of Synthetix lies regarding DeFi more broadly, I think I can only echo the points of everyone who has spoken before me. I hope that we're going to provide a kind of fundamental liquidity layer, both on Optimism, Ethereum, and increasingly onto other chains.
Thanks, Tara. Ethernaut, your response, please.
Oh yeah, sorry. So yeah, like I believe that Synthetix has been a very successful experiment of pulling liquidity and building stuff on top of it. But so far, what we build on top of it is kind of hard-coded, right? So the iteration that and the exploration that we do on top of that is extremely limited. So B3, I think it's complete innovation because it detaches the pooling of liquidity from what you build on top of it. Like you just said, it's the WordPress DeFi, and I really see it that way. And I've seen the code. I just recently finished my code review, and the amount of innovation in that code is just mind blowing. I think this will really be part of the lower pole of the entire next iteration of DeFi. So yeah, for me, it's about shipping this, and it's enough for me, I think.
Thank you, Ethernaut. A question was asked in the chat, sort of in the middle of your responses, but it's a good one. And since some in the community will only be relying on the recording, I wanted to give everybody a chance to sort of address it. Open for discussion. If anybody has anything to add, some of you already touched on it. Besides ETH, what other collateral would the Spartan Council, or would you as a Spartan Council member be comfortable with to create pools with?
I have an active proposal currently, SIP 315, that proposes integrating SNX as a non-minting collateral that can be applied using risk-assessed variables to different pools. I would like to see SNX still have that position as a collateral asset in V3, but it's still in the process of being worked upon, and I'm very much open to core contributors contributing their thoughts to that practical side. But yeah, currently SNX and ETH are the two that I envisage being used in V3 in the next year.
I think ETH should make up the vast majority, 70–80% of the collateral, but I think we should have the opportunity to have diverse collateral backing, especially as we allow new markets to emerge. We want to have people have that optionality for their markets to use different collateral variety. I think the thing we have to be careful of is capping it as a total of the available OI and making sure that those margin factors are realistic. So if we want to take on some exotic collateral that isn't highly liquid, hey, maybe that does have a 400, 500, 800% margin factor and is capped at 2% of the OI. But I don't think we need to be exclusionary. I think we have to have ETH as the bulk of it because that is the right decision, both economically and in line with our values. And I think we have to have Synthetix as a component of it so that we don't just shoot our own protocol in the foot after all these years. But I don't think we should shut out everything else. I just think we have to do it with an abundance of caution.
I would just say, like, look at historically what has worked, right? Most protocols, like you see Maker, they onboarded a bunch of different collateral types, and for the most part, they don't get much usage, right? They get some usage. And for Maker, it's a very simple model. All you're doing is minting DAI. You're minting a stable coin that people could use. For Synthetix, the fact that the collateral is, serving a much more complex purpose to the protocol and to the markets that it's providing liquidity to, I think we have to be a lot more strict on what we add. And I don't see anything that's worked. There's only two types of collaterals that have scaled on ETH ever, historically. ETH itself and wrap Bitcoin, yeah, to some degree, but the main other one is USDC, right? It's all USDC. And in fact, we're piggyback off USDC right now with the DAI wrapper. So like, there is no multiple types, like diverse rainbow that, picture out there. It's not like that. There's no solid system that uses multiple collateral types and leans on all of them. Like, there's going to be mainly, no matter what, it's always just going to be ETH. And then, of course, there's going to be some demand for like a non-volatile asset that has a lot of liquidity. And what do you know? USDC fits that picture. Of course, USDC is highly censorable, though, right? So I would say, like, really, it would just be ETH is the main thing we focus on. I don't think SNX needs to be a part of that system at all. It doesn't. I think we should transition away from it for the most part as much as we can. SNX is going to serve to govern the protocol and to align incentives. And I'll get more to this later on, but just to answer this question, I think SNX is going to fit in the picture very well without being collateral. And I don't think like there's going to be tons of demand for all types of collateral types, with the exception that on the native chains that ETH might be deployed on, like right now it's Optimism, if it's deployed on Arbitrum, and Arbitrum has a token as well, I would say like including Optimism and Arbitrum tokens for collateral types would make some sense. And again, but the market is not going to price them really high on that list, and it's going to be like a minor part of it anyway. But I think those might be good options, but I don't think I don't think at all it makes sense to to have tons of different collateral types just because it hasn't worked historically, and it won't work here either. It's just easier to like scale just ETH and design the protocol to scale with ETH. Like basically the SUSD issuer that Afif's working on, you can't do that for every single collateral asset, right? Like you could technically, but it scales mainly for ETH. So like we want all this for we want to essentially use like the most liquid collateral, the one that has proven to work the most historically. And I feel like it's pretty clear what that is, and that's ETH, right? So I would say we build around that and we scale around that, and we make ETH work as collateral in the DeFi ecosystem, because it hasn't really worked very well as primary collateral in other places, right? It's worked well and like back in the system, but then like for peg issues and stuff, like there's always some nuance where some part where like it helps to use some other type of collateral like that is non-volatile, like USDC. So yeah, I would say like we can make ETH work, and we should try to build the protocol around making ETH like primary collateral.
To rebuke that a bit, I don't think we can, shoehorn ourselves into only things that have worked before. Otherwise, we shouldn't be trying to be, the best in terms of sort of the risk management of the protocol. And I think there's going to be demand for both partners who integrate in their market, wanting their tokens to be a component of their market. And I think in other native chains, we will see demand for things like Matic or BNB, depending on where you're deployed, because they are native and sovereign to those chains. So I think we have to be built in a way where we can allow for other tokens to be used as collateral, even if they are a small minority of the open interest, or they are isolated to different chains, or only used if they want to issue an asset that is different than the SNXUSD, which needs to not be named that. But I don't think we can shoehorn ourselves into saying only Ethereum has worked in the past, and therefore we should only use Ethereum when we're a novel concept that prides ourselves on our ability to manage collateral risk better than others have. Prime example being, no one has really had a stable coin that has been backed by its own token like SNX has without blowing up. So I think we should have some caution in going down that road just because it hasn't worked previously.
Definitely, I said, and if the examples used were the examples I mentioned as well, right? Like I think if we're on Matic, like a Matic token would make sense. If we're on BNB token makes sense. Arbitrum token, like Optimus, those would make sense. I just don't think it's going to be a situation where we need to worry about all these different types of collaterals, just because they don't get traction most places, and there's no reason why it would gain same traction here that much either. So that's my view on it.
It strikes me as odd to the aspirant of Synthetix being a fundamental DeFi primitive, whilst not being aspirant towards SNX achieving the liquidity that would enable it to be a collateral through the application of strict due diligence. And that's my thought on the matter.
All right, great. Anyone have anything else to add? Moving on to question 4. Question 4 will be open for the group. What do you believe are the biggest pain points in the Synthetix protocol that need to be addressed by this council? Again, open for discussion, debate.
Historical debt in the minds of the broader community. They see Synthetix as one thing, as a collateral backed issuance of virtual assets, pursuing perps for consumers. And they've seen that kind of play blow up time and time again. I think the largest challenge we face as we move forward is retelling the story of what Synthetix is, and why it's trustworthy, why it's valuable, and why it should be underpinning all of this next generation of DeFi. I think we have a lot of mind share out there, but it's not mind share that we want. And I think reframing that is an uphill battle. We still face that meme of, Synthetix only has 12 users and challenges like that. So in retelling that story and representing what we are, we have to have a very well defined message and positioning within the market. We need to say Synthetix isn't just some cobbling together of different asset issuance, we're the WordPress of DeFi, or we are a risk engine as a service or something like that, where we can really begin to tell people the story of what Synthetix is today, why it's valuable to them, and where we want to go, so we can reshape that conversation around us in a way that's productive.
I think that's a really good point, and I think it dovetails quite nicely with what was said earlier on about telling the story and having a narrative that's easy to digest on what V3 really is for partners. Because right now, if you look at it, it's very technical in nature. It doesn't really translate to ease of understanding. And I think that is potentially a big banana skin for the transition to V3, because if you get that right early on, you'll get higher adoption. It just kind of follows a logical path.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in here. I think, you know, the main problem, the issue that Synthetix faces is basically the same thing that every DeFi protocol is facing. And actually not just DeFi protocols, layer ones too. It's just a blockchain issue. It comes down to essentially, you know, the decentralization trilemma, where you have three different things you're trying to solve for in blockchain. You're trying to solve for decentralization, you're trying to solve for security, and you're trying to solve for scalability. And I think that, you know, applies as much to layer ones as it does to the application layer. Like, for example, with Bitcoin, what you know is that the security of the blockchain is one, like there's rules of a blockchain, like certain things that just can't happen. Like you cannot move funds unless you have access to a private key. These are basic rules of the Bitcoin blockchain. That's synonymous to like a smart contract on the protocol layer having its rules. And then with Bitcoin, you have also scalability, and with Bitcoin, it's just about block space, right? It's about the demand for block space. Whereas with like an application layer, something like Synthetix, that scalability is more in the demand for synths and access to protocol leverage or whatever the protocol offers. And then the last thing is, you know, this other side of it, which is basically maintaining decentralization in the face of all this. And that's where it gets very tricky, right? So like to have a protocol that functions, offers a service, it's decentralized such that it's resilient, it's censorship resistant, permissionless, but then also has the right incentives aligned to keep it humming and running and working. I think it basically becomes like, you know, an open problem for every application. And I think for Synthetix to solve it, we need, like, this goes back to what I said before, we need to see V3 work in the wild. If it works, we need to quickly start finding a way to decentralize the protocol such that it'll be resilient. Because if we, like, I appreciate what Adam says about, like, you know, making it very accessible to builders right away. That makes sense, right, from a growth perspective. But if you look at the base layer, before you allow all these different protocols to build on it, well, first of all, we don't stop them. Like, they could build on it no matter what. But like, before we make that a real priority, we need to make sure the protocol is decentralized enough and permissionless and censorship resistant enough that it can support all these added layers being built on top. And I feel like, you know, for Uniswap, that's very easy, right? They have a very simple set of smart contracts. They're immutable for the most part. And, you know, there's not much that the Gov token does there to, you know, be a part of that. And there's not much like question for anyone who's using it, right? But for a protocol that has to be upgraded, something like a lending protocol, like a Compound, or like Synthetix, you know, it's going to have, it's basically a collateral backed debt protocol. It needs like these knobs and handles to be, you know, governed over time. And it requires a right incentive alignment. And I feel like Bitcoin, for example, has failed, right, with incentive alignment. Like, if block producers aren't incentivized to create blocks, like miners aren't incentivized, and long term, like if the block rewards drop to like a negligible amount, the security is undermined. So like that same idea applies to application layer, the protocol layer, and like if the incentives between, you know, the liquidity providers and SNX token holders and the users are not aligned well, the protocol is just not going to thrive in the long term. So I feel like we really need to figure out how to solve for those problems, because it's not easy, right? Everybody, you know, every protocol is trying to solve for these things in their own right, and it's not going to be easy to solve for them. And I think that should be our focus, and, you know, the biggest pain point. And you know, realistically, I talk about like SNX being a governance token, and I feel like a governance token is really important because it aligns the incentives between all the users and makes sure that the protocol is still upgradable and it could, you know, change over time if it needs to. So like the value prop of a gov token is extremely high. It's just that other protocols just don't have a big need for governance. For example, like Uniswap doesn't have a big need for governance. Compound has a need for governance, but like it's broken their system, right? And we've had all this time to like observe where some things have worked and where they failed. And I feel like we have a huge advantage there to now that we're designing the protocol governance for V3 to design it in a way that's highly resilient, incentives align long term, and the token has a purpose in this picture, which it will 100%. Like it's very clear to me the token's gonna have a purpose. So I think that is like the biggest problem that all protocols face, and I feel like Synthetix is in a good position to solve those problems.
I'd love to actually ask Millie a question on this, Millie, if I can parse what you're saying and what I've heard you say in the past when you're talking about the decentralization component. I want to understand what that looks like. And I think in the past you've advocated for more direct governance voting from token holders rather than having them vote for a council who helps manage those things. And so I want to understand it in a future vision where markets are building out on top of us. Part of what we're selling right now is that offering is the expertise in risk management and collateral factors and things like that for optimal safety. How do we still sell that to partners in a model where it's direct governance holders, direct token holders who are voting on these things? When we've seen kind of the challenges in other protocols having direct voting, they mostly don't do direct voting. They farm stuff out to Gauntlet to tell them the risk parameters because the crowd, the masses, can't develop that expertise very easily.
Yeah, that's a good question, right? And it basically falls into what I was saying. Like it's very difficult to strike a balance here, and that's where where I think all of our cumulative brain power could come and work together to solve for it. But I think for the most part, in order like the current Spartan Council, the way it is, it's great, right? But it was always in a transition, like for a transition for the protocol. I don't think like the level of power the Spartan Council has at the moment might be a bit too much, right? The Spartan Council could still have a very crucial role in how V3 operates, but I feel like it should, for the most part, it doesn't need as much as it has right now, and it's a kind of an attack vector in the way it is, right? Let's say like if the Spartan Council was in charge of essentially full upgrades to the protocol, and like there was no P down multisig or whatever, and it was just the Spartan Council's votes upgrading the protocall. A few of the Spartan councilors getting kidnapped could just stop governance from going forward, right? And that's problematic. Like, maybe I'm using the wrong term for kidnap. Like, what if they get like detained by law enforcement? What if there's like a malicious government attack by regulators, right? So like these are the things I think about when we were trying to build out a protocol. And
we do have an inactivity threshold, Millie, so we would be able to prompt an election to occur if members of the Spartan Council were to be
absolutely right. We would be able to, but like, what would happen in the meantime for the protocol? Like, who would be able to upgrade it, right? So I think for the most part, you definitely want the token like to be a huge part of that, and I will get to like in the future about what I think that looks like. And one thing I'll just put out there, like there are governance models out there that do not suffer from voter apathy and their on-chain governance, and V-Curve is one of those examples of not like very active governance because there's a huge incentive for people to participate. And then the other thing we could do is also like have epoch-based proposals where you can't claim like your fees, protocol fees or something or whatever if you haven't voted on a proposal, or if the person you delegated to hasn't voted on a proposal. So there's ways to make people overcome voter apathy and make people engage in the protocol without giving.
I would argue that the tokenomics hasn't had the necessary testing due to the fact that it relies on a 4-year locking period. So you can't say whether apathy has presented itself unless you're kind of measuring it over that time that it inherently is built around that greater than 4-year period.
I agree. I don't think the 4-year period is great either, but I would say like in the time being right now, they have really high vote participation, every single proposal. So like even like the smaller proposals that kind of don't mean much, like simple like parameter changes for a random pool, they get really high voter participation. So like there's a lot of voter participation because of the way incentives are aligned with V-Curve. So that's just the way I see it.
Yeah, I think ultimately I could agree partially with Millie. We probably need less direct SCCP governments, especially around the configurables. Spartan Council is great for like protocol level changes, but for the configurables, I think we've been going back and forth around C ratio a bit too much for my taste. And I think a lot of configurables could be turned into gauges in V3 in some future model, where you could have less direct on hands Spartan Council governance deciding these configurables. I don't believe that the Spartan Council is always efficiently right. I think the market could probably make a better decision on these, and with the right incentives. But the Spartan Council could still be in there as a backstop for should something malicious happen around gauges, or somebody just takes over. But other than that, what are the pain points that we have? I think the main pain points are being handled by V3 and perhaps V2. That is lack of SUSD liquidity, and then basically a bad product around fees in perps trading, and that's being handled right now. So I'm excited about that. And maybe another thing that comes to my mind is circling back to the aspect of decentralization. I think we could maybe do better on decentralizing front ends as well. Either having alternative front ends that offer us the same UI, hosted on different URLs, or maybe have alternative front ends with different features, different functionality built on top of our protocol. So I think those are things that we could do better in the future.
So I just wanted to say about the pain point of governance that we did pause the development of B3 GM. But a very nice thing about B3 by itself, without GM, I guess, is that anyone can deploy a pool, right? And whoever owns that pool has the ability to configure that pool, and there's a ton of parameters. So if the Spartan Council deploys a pool, they would be able to directly control it with a multisig out of the box. You just have to deploy a master save, and that's it.
Something that I'll add just on permissionless pools like that, like I think Rari was a pretty good example of just allowing the community to do kind of whatever they want within specific bounds, I guess, just allowing them to control any toggle that the protocol enables. And that obviously led to a bunch of different rug pulls, which ultimately fell on the protocol itself, at least from a mindshare perspective. So I think if we are moving in a direction where we are completely permissionlessly allowing any user to create whatever pool that they want, we need to do that within a strict set of bounds.
It could be permissionless with a backstop, So if the Spartan Council notices something that's an attack vector possibly, then it steps in.
All right. Any final thoughts before we move on?
Only that I hope I don't get kidnapped.
All right, moving on. Next question. Sorry, what was that?
No,
Anyone?
it's going to be a sarcastic joke. Carry on.
Next question. Which of the following should be a higher priority for the Spartan Council, and why? First, deploying smart contracts that constitute a successful, widely adopted product running efficiently for all participants, or a continued value proposition and profits for SNX stakers. This question is for individual response. Adam, we'll hear from you first.
I mean, only one of those things is directly under the control, really, of Spartan Council, and it's making sure that the governance approves and implements a tokenomics model that is valuable to holders, still has SNX as part of this ecosystem, still gives it fair revenue and not a 5% cut, and make sure that it has value long term. The deploying of contracts is a CC matter, and we can push them to do so, and we can help vote on parameters, but that is not really a Spartan Council thing. So if we say that's our priority for 4 months, we're not really doing all that much. The second part of it, on making sure we have partners who are using it, making sure we have integrations, I do think that's valuable, and that goes back to the kind of WordPress of Synthetix model in making sure we have the lowest common denomination, making sure we're partnering with places that do tutorials, places that can do thematic deployments, places that do code review and things like that, to make sure that they're up to date on and providing resources for building on top of Synthetix. And then cycling back to look at things like our documentation and our presentation of V3, because V3 is very technically complex. It takes a while to wrap your head around what it is and what its purpose is. And even as someone on council going through this, there was multiple times that I pinged a fee for Noah to go, well, what the hell do we mean here, right? So we need to make this language accessible, and I think that's really where council should be digging in. But we cannot do that if we make Synthetix token valueless for the risk that people are taking on in this management. And so I think, really drill down on your question, that is the priority, is making sure we have a stable model to reward and fuel this ecosystem moving forward. We shouldn't rug the holders who have been committed to building that for years.
Great point. Thank you, Adam. Jordi, your response, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the sustainability of the tokenomics, that's something that I have a lot of thoughts on in general. I would probably lean towards the other side in terms of, not needing necessarily to focus on, I don't know, kind of like the immediate accrual or number go up, and more try to gain market share in terms of like relevance, in terms of mind share, in terms of like integrations and partnerships. And a lot of the like number go up comes from that. If people really think that there's, something interesting happening, like, firms like mine can just buy like multiple percents of it, and that will kind of like, do well for everybody in the community, while like trying to focus on, how do we extract, value right now for the token, and how do we immediately just avoid any price drop. I think it's the wrong way to go. I'm generally in favor of like not being so scared of the shadow, and trying to like avoid like any moment in time where there's possibly like not an immediate use case. And there were some points earlier on about locking up the token so that nobody sells it, and I think that's probably the wrong thing to focus on. Locking up tokens is not really a positive way to have a good price impact. I think it's kind of one of the main misunderstandings of the crypto space in general. So I would say like just focusing on doing a really good job with the product itself, and there's a lot of reasons why investors will support the price. And we don't have to go like full Facebook, where they just bought they bought like $19 billion worth of WhatsApp without having like a single way to monetize it. Maybe that's a bit extreme. It's always good to have some fee accrual, but just directionally, I would say like that makes more sustainable tokenomics, in my opinion.
Thank you, Jordi. Cav, we'll hear from you next on this one.
Thanks. I think the question is a little bit of a trap, but I appreciate the, prompting some controversial opinion. I agree with Jordi that we got to do the first one to kind of get the second one. Sorry if there's honking in the background. We need to build this platform, and I'll up Adam's analogy from WordPress of DeFi to Shopify of DeFi, just because it's rhymes and it's a bit more modern. In order to do that, we need to build a platform that protocols want to build on and is stable, has the right kinds of collateral and the right kind of governance. And if we do that, we'll get usage. We'll get usage that people are willing to pay for, and then we can naturally accrue, revenue to the SNX token, which I think should retain its value in that way. Whether it backs as much collateral is probably how much collateral it backs. If it backs much is probably the question for the future council to decide on. But I think we have to do the first in order to get the second.
Thank you, Cav. Ethernaut?
Yeah, I also think it's kind of a a tricky question. But in the end, I always think we need to protect the stakers. They're the base of the protocol. They support the protocol. But I don't think it's about maximizing profit for them. I think, at least the way I see it, it's about generating value in general, not only for the stakers.
Thank you, Ethernaut. Danny?
Yeah, no, I completely agree that kind of with A comes B. I think if we can incentivize liquidity to come, and by doing that, 10 to 100x the amount of fees that are generated by having such deep liquidity, the percentage of fees that I guess are directed to SNX stakers can kind of go down in kind as a result, and it's a win-win for everyone. Where I think this question came from is what I think it is based on some of the tokenomics proposals around what percentage of fees should go towards LPs versus the percentage of fees that will go towards a value accrual mechanism for SNX itself. And this is part of the discussion that has happened over the last probably month or so, but a point that Adam had made a while ago is if we are giving too many fees initially to LPs and then decreasing it over time to give a higher percentage to SNX stakers, we kind of run the risk of LPs removing their collateral because the rewards have been reduced. And so I think it's important to kind of start on the smaller end, see what kind of fees how much collateral we can kind of incentivize to come, and then over time increase the reward if we're not getting the amount of collateral deposited as we want to have as deep liquidity as we need. And so I think that's the toggle that we'll want to play with. But yeah, that's where I think the motivation for that question came from.
Thank you, Danny. Funk, we'll hear from you next.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of echo some of what's been said, right? Because really what you want is both. And it seems a bit kind of silly to prioritize one over the other. And I think really like kind of when you think about it, that's sort of really the relationship between the core team and the Spartan Council as a division of responsibilities, right? So the only time you wouldn't be able to have it is if they're not working well together. And I think really, the final thing to kind of really say to drive that home is if you don't get both right, the protocol overall is not going to be successful. So the priority clearly has to be on doing both.
Thank you, Tara. Your response, please.
Yes, I think the ideal would be the production of a protocol that is able to draw a huge number of users and users of significant volume, so that we're generating profits for stakers that would make anyone with the technical ability to do so jump at the chance at themselves becoming an SNX staker. I think that's perfectly reasonable to be aspiring to, and an important role of the SC in the next few months is going to be really designing the means by which that's going to occur.
Thank you, Tara. Cyberduck, your response, please.
I'll just add to the echo chamber here. So A or B, it's definitely both. So you can't have a continued value proposition and profits without a successful product. So it is also a chicken egg problem, where it's clear that a great product is the precursor to profits. So I believe we should not be short-sighted when we're setting the incentives to LPs. I think that's a follow-up for the next question.
All right, thank you, Duck. And Millie, your response, please.
Yeah, definitely. I think, the question itself is a bit of a trick question, but it's, it ties back into what I just said on to the last question. Like basically it's the dilemma of every blockchain is to balance these things. And like these are blockchain systems, they're two sides of the same coin. Like there is no protocol and token separate. They're one and the same. And like they function together. One serves as like the base layer, the other serves as the incentive for that base layer. And so like if you look at Bitcoin, for example, I love using that example because the token does nothing, it's useless, and it's undermines like Bitcoin's longevity, right? And it's the same thing to be said basically for Uniswap. Yeah, the smart contracts work essentially, right? But the token does nothing for the protocol. And even though it could be a good incentive mechanism to make sure the protocol runs properly forever, it isn't being used. And Uniswap LPs, like I've done a lot of research on this, they're not 100% proven to be profitable. So like it could be like they're burning money like LPs and not getting anything and just getting the fees from the AMM, right? But that's not gonna last forever. And eventually people are gonna realize, they're gonna basically realize that. And so like, it's the same thing with Synthetix Protocol. Like the protocol, the smart contracts being deployed, like I wanna see them work in real time, yes. But like, let's say they are successful and they work perfectly well, there still needs to be a proper incentive structure for this protocol to upgrade, right? Like because Uniswap, like Bitcoin, does not upgrade, doesn't do anything, right? The protocol just stays, it just is. With ETH and with like other like more dynamic protocols like Synthetix, you basically have a situation where the protocol has to upgrade over time. And so if the incentives aren't properly aligned with the upgrade ability of the protocol and like the base of it, the system won't work. That's the problem with blockchain systems, right? They need to be a proper incentive. If ETH validators are not incentivized to validate blocks, the chain will halt. Like it's just the way blockchains work. And with Bitcoin, the problem is that eventually these miners will not have the right incentives to mining, right? So like this is where it ties in. Like the Bitcoin the coin itself is not properly intertwined with the protocol, and that's where incentives are broken. And that's why it's two sides of the same coin. SNX token and the protocol are one and the same. The incentives need to work together to make sure that like the protocol thrives for a long time. That's the point of blockchain systems. That's why we're not a business and we're a blockchain product.
Thank you, Millie. Moving on to the next question.
Actually, Connor, can I just one quick clarifier that I think is important for the community to know? When we talk about the incentives to SNX stakers, the Treasury Council is the largest SNX staker, and that's where we provide a lot of the revenue that compensates all the initiatives we do, from grants to the actual building of the protocol. We're not a VC-funded protocol. We don't have an infinite cash runway to burn. It is very important that SNX stakers receive a fair and adequate cut of protocol for us to continue to exist long-term and have that financial stability. We're in a good place right now. We can't rug that runway, right? We have to make sure that we have financial stability to continue long into the future.
Thank you, Adam, for that clarification. Moving on to the next question. This next question will also be for individual response. What are your thoughts for SNX tokenomics going forward with V3? How should SNX play a role? If proposing a change to current tokenomics, what would the transition process look like? TerraBellus, we'll hear from you first on this one.
Okay, well, this one's an easy/difficult one for me because I have a 2,500 word proposal that elaborates on this exact question. So if anyone would like to look into that, I encourage them to look at SIP 315. Essentially, I'm advocating for the retention of SNX as a collateral, but with controls on it that prevent debt being minted against it. Rather, it responds to credit and debit that is accrued on the market to which it's assigned or delegated itself. And also the requirement that a Synthetix pool is combined with an F pool in such a way that people who are staking ETH are required to also stake a proportion of SNX in order to receive rewards, fees that are generated on the pools in which they're in. So it's a tokenomics program that is heavily utilizing SNX going forward and on a continuing basis in the V3. It also elaborates on the proposed transition from V2 V1 to the V2 legacy market that will be generated when V3 first launches, and then onwards to the V3 native market that will enable the collateralization of ETH, and if the tokenomics that I'm proposing go ahead, SNX as well. So yeah, again, I encourage people to look at the SIP for probably a clearer or detailed elaboration on where my position is.
Thank you, Terra. Did you mention the SIP number?
Yes, SIP 315.
315. Thank you, Terra. Adam, we'll hear from you next on this question.
All right. Just like Terra, I have a long written version that's in a draft, so I will link that in the governance chat and kind of give you the high-level breakdown of it. Basically, overall concept is that we need to make sure that Synthetix token is still used in multiple ways here and that there is value accrual. Part of that is making sure that there are minimum fee tiers for any permissioned market that wants to mint SNX USD rather than their own synthetic asset, and raising that to a higher minimum tier if they want to get any inflationary rewards. Moving preferential rewards so that most of the rewards that are coming from inflation as well as fee capture are coming to pools that are owned by the Spartan Council and the SNX community that we know are the most stable. And then using a certain split for purchasing voting power over time in other protocols, whether that's Curve, Convex, things like that. I put a proposal there initially of what those should be, but I think in a rewrite of this would move it towards that being the decision for Treasury Council to do, or perhaps even voters directly. And then we can use that as we gain rewards in other protocols to minimize and eventually turn off inflation rewards in SNX so that there is no more SNX because the rewards are coming from external. And we can use a VE locking model to decide where various pools fees are going for the 2/3 that aren't coming into Spartan Council managed pools, and allow people to take out a base collateral against that VE locking. And so over time, this should allow us to set a inflation curve that is inversely proportional to the amount of SNX that is locked. So if you want to turn off inflation, you lock your SNX into vote locking, can still use it as collateral. We use revenues to buy the voting tokens in other protocols that you vote on, and for everybody who is locking, the amount of inflation goes down until we hit a 0 point because we've reached an equilibrium of locked assets, growing rewards being paid from other protocols, and fees coming in. And we no longer need to have this continual endless inflation that dilutes token holders.
Thank you, Adam. Ethernaut, your response, please. V3 tokenomics.
Well, this falls for my area of specialty, but if I had something to say about it, is that I think inflation was essential to bootstrap the protocol, but now we don't rely on it so much, and we should encourage and look for other ways to incentivize staking. That's by increasing actual fees and profit. We could also use tokens being created in new blockchains, and use the feature that B3 has, which is you can distribute any token for rewards. It doesn't have to be SNX. So yeah, just for the people that understand finance better, just I would say use all the new tools that you are going to have available.
Thank you, Ethernaut. Funk, your response, please.
Hey, so yeah, I kind of like a little bit of both the proposals that Adam and Terra were talking about before, and I think there's probably a pathway to join that up a little bit, so it's a consolidated approach. My one big watch out that comes across ramping down SNX staking is that you need to do that gradually, really, if you don't want to see a massive downward pressure on the price. And so it seems like it's quite a good way to do that by ramping down via LP, and I think that will have some additional benefits with LP as a kind of driver of collateral. I also really, really like the idea that Synthetix will start to grab some gauge directing assets so that they can move towards a different form of incentivization for liquidity. And I think that's very, very essential for the future, particularly for things like atomics. And I, to echo something that I said earlier on, I really think that's not just a sole responsibility of Synthetix. I think that's directly a shared responsibility with partners that Synthetix needs to work with. And so probably you'll find a lot of mutual benefit as you set off down a path like that can be kind of exploited, really, right? And that seems like that would be a really, really good way to figure out how to ease off some of the emissions that we have been reliant on in the past. I think if we can do that and we make sure that those incentives are kind of aligned across the three areas that I talked about earlier on, then it will work well. That's the guarantee, really, that kind of comes with that. So that's it. That's my 2 cents on that.
Great, thank you, Funk. Jordi, your thoughts?
Yeah, I hadn't seen Adam's proposal before. I've just been going through it now. Seems very well thought out. I haven't gotten to the end, just in terms of how it's laying out the different considerations in terms of, the one side, like controlling inflation in a reasonable way while allowing incentives to get aligned between all the participants. Looking forward to digging in and reading the rest. I had read 315. Thought there were some good points there as well. So I guess it's kind of bringing together all the ideas and discussing them. So no immediate preference, but seem to be some good directions here.
Thank you, Jordi. Duck, your response, please.
All right, so I'm kind of open-minded to the nature and design of value accrual to SNX. But to name a few options that are on the table, rent-free rewards from all pools and markets, LP withdrawal fees, so those could possibly be set by the pool creators themselves, or adding more game theory to SNX itself through the introduction of gauge voting, whereby the gauges would direct the capped emissions towards pools and markets, which could be a great tool for bootstrapping liquidity in new pools. Basically, an incentive that would both attract people to create markets and to buy SNX to direct those emissions towards them. And as for the process, I definitely go about doing it modularly. We don't really have to decide all of it right away up front. Obviously, SNX's collateral is not going away overnight. We'll have that as a legacy pool at minimum, and that's fine. Maybe more if we decide. In addition to that, we need to focus on growing the non-SNX based collaterals and pools. So signaling to the LPs that sharing their profits with SNX token holders is something that is happening, is given, but that we're willing to find the right balance of how much down the road as a protocol liquidity, how much down the road is needed. And ultimately, growing the protocol liquidity will lead to growing revenues that can be accrued back to the SNX token holders. I would be probably against charging too high of a fee share on the LPs early on, where we're not existing in isolation in DeFi. LPs have other opportunities, and early on we need to basically offer the carrot. We need to convince them that the revenues will scale. It's going to be a good product, and on top of their markets, volumes will be happening, and as they do, they will be tolerant for us taking a cut from them if we deem worthy. Whether we start at 5% or 30% or 40%, I think that's up to this discussion. But I would advise against starting too high, and maybe a thought experiment. If SNX captures some fees from all the pools and markets, whereas ETH as collateral captures profits only from pools where that LP is staked and deposited as collateral, you don't really have a linear sensitivity relationship between the fee share. Meaning, in the example where SNX captures 30% of fees from pools A, B, C, and D, those 30% may be ultimately more in absolute terms than the 70% the LP captures in a single pool. So my closing thoughts on this is we can approach this modularly in many ways, but I like to emphasize to all the token holders that worrying about SNX value accrual is absolutely unwarranted. It's going to happen.
Thank you, Duck. Danny, your response, please.
Yeah, so I don't personally believe that SNX must be used as collateral in the system long term in order to maintain its value proposition, but it obviously still should earn fee rewards in inflation, at least short term, while fees are still ramping up. I would like to see us move towards zero inflation long term once we're able to support that in the system. I think long term, I would be in favor of supporting SNX as collateral at a very high C ratio. I've seen some really interesting things from a fee capture or value accrual mechanism as well for SNX, at least allowing more holders to enter the system. One in particular I thought was really interesting, like similar to what Lyra has with regards to locking up the token to achieve a maximum reward. So I think having a rewards boost for SNX being staked even for ETH collateral providers could be interesting. I'd also be in favor of the vote locking mechanism that Adam was mentioning earlier. I think from a transition perspective, we do need to make sure that V3 is working. So we'll obviously want to be continuously monitoring what the adoption looks like. And we're not going to be changing the tokenomic model of SNX in the V2 system. I do think that we want to start ETH LPs at a lower percentage of rewards and then ramp up depending on what the uptake of ETH into the system looks like. And we do have to remember that V2 is not going to go away immediately. It's going to be around for a long time. So any changes in V3 is not going to affect really anything with regards to SNX tokenomics in the short term.
Thank you, Danny. Millie, your response, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Ducky. I think that there's the concern of SNX having utility in V3 is very unwarranted. There's no need for concern. It's going to have utility in V3. I mean, that is inherent. But what I would say is that I'm not really in a rush to deploy any sort of tokenomics or to solidify SNX's position in V3, just because I want to see V3 live. It is still an audit right now. It hasn't been deployed yet. I want to see it live and how it functions, and then we can make better decisions then. I think for the first part, SNX will be collateral, right, in V3, at least in the beginning. So that's fine. It'll have some utility there, and then it'll also be used for incentives to make sure that the ETH markets are bootstrapped, that there's enough LPs providing liquidity. And then as we get towards the transition where we know that V3 is working fine now, we know where the essentially the limitations are and where it needs a boost. That's when we decide on the governance aspect. And I think it comes back to the point I've been making over and over again on this call is that there's this trilemma for blockchains, right? And aligning incentives and making sure we optimize for the right parts are they're critical. And so for a protocol like Synthetix, the token has to serve a purpose of governance. And governance is really important for Synthetix because the parameterization of the protocol relies on this governance. And so we want to put that governance power in the hands of token holders, empower them. And when we do that, at the same time, we need to incentivize them to participate. And how do we incentivize them to participate? Well, we give them fees from the liquidity pools. The ratio of how much fees they get versus the LPs, that should be decided by governance. And obviously, SNX, stakers, token holders, whatever, if they decide to take too much of that fees, then LPs will leave, right? But the way we could balance it out is by giving SNX rewards to those LPs in return for these fees. So the LPs get the fees and SNX, but the SNX vote lockers will get the fees. And the reason I think vote locking makes sense is because it prevents governance attacks, and because there's an issue in with treasuries and DeFi is that if someone grabs all the as many tokens as they can and enough to pass a proposal, they can create a proposal to steal funds from the treasury or do malicious stuff to the protocol. and you need to prevent that. And the good way to prevent that is through vote locking. So like I think that's another way we can mitigate. But I'm not in a rush to implement these. I really want to see V3, be out in the live, be out in the open, and SNX is going to be a collateral in V3 in the beginning anyway. So like Ducky said, it's unwarranted to be too worked up about that right now.
All right, thank you, Millie. Moving on to the next question. This one is open for the group. The question is, what new products would you like to see built post V3? Again, open for discussion.
WordPress level abstraction of complexity and deploying templated markets for an AMM, a perps market, an options market, etc. A virtualized AMM to compete with Uniswap that settles through SETH back into ETH when you're selling the non-synthetic side of the token through curve pools, because Uniswap has just become stagnant and useless, and Sushi is constantly managing internal issues, and so there's a huge opportunity for anybody who can solve liquidity problems. We should be able to solve that by virtualizing one side of the AMM with Synthetix. And then referral links, because there's a huge opportunity for partners to push that forward, and we need to provide some infrastructure for them to properly do that. Everybody who integrates with Synthetix should be able to easily roll out a referral program.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think something that is very critical that I really want to build on it, and it's part of this the roadmap. It's a SIP that's already written, is the SUSD issuer. That's something very novel to the industry, and it's something very Synthetix is in a unique position to be able to offer this product of being like a collateral backed debt pool, and then being having a perps market within it. It just it creates this opportunity to have essentially issue stablecoins against ETH longs. Against ETH shorts, and so it gives this opportunity that there hasn't been any way to successfully scale ETH collateral for minting stablecoins, and it hasn't been done successfully by anyone. Maker had got close to it, and they essentially bowed down to USDC and brought on USDC, and now USDC basically backs most of DAI. So it hasn't been a good way to keep a stablecoin relatively stable. It doesn't have to always be one for one. I think there's a huge misconception among people that they think stablecoins need to trade 1-to-1 with USD. That's not true. It doesn't have to. It just needs to be relatively stable and predictable. And I think the SUSD issuer is a great opportunity to do that. So I really want to see that built next, and I really think that's going to be the game changer, right? Because this is one thing that is just enabled by the architecture of Synthetix and ETH only collateral, and we'd be the only product protocol to offer something like this. So it's just a way to scale SUSD safely, and it's basically something that nobody's been able to achieve so far. So we'd be hitting two birds with one stone. We'd be scaling ETH collateral in a way that nobody has been able to, and at the same time we'll have this decentralized perps exchange that an on-demand leverage that can be tapped into by users or protocols. So that's what I'm really excited about.
I would like to see something akin to what happened in DeFi summer with staking rewards.sol in terms of the ability to create pools through the V3 mechanisms. Basically, a lot of DeFi summer was built on the ability to take staking rewards.sol and apply it as a liquidity source. And so I had myself there. Yeah, I'll conclude there.
So I'll jump in here. One of the things I've been thinking about quite a lot recently is that in the space in general, there's a lot of activity, a lot of energy, and a lot of expense that goes into trying to maintain token pegs. And I think that provides kind of a really unique opportunity to do something through the new functionality that's enabled in V3 by limiting the market to allowing those pegs to be maintained and upkept through LPs being posted to a kind of lending market, and then using that lending market to actually issue fiat-based synths to increase the liquidity of fiat-based synths. And if you do that with stable token pegs, there's kind of a bit of a risk-off aspect to it. And it also would have the knock-on impact of being a really big enabler to driving additional volume for atomics as those synths entered the marketplace outside of the Synthetix ecosystem. And I think as a kind of teaser to something that could dovetail quite nicely with other stuff that we've heard, because that would be a major benefit for protocols like Curve, there would probably be a great way that you could stream some of the Curve emissions, the CRV emissions, and take those into ownership for Synthetix because of that, and then use that to further reduce the Synthetix-based pools that would benefit from it.
All right. Anyone else with anything to add?
Maybe some wishful thinking here. I'd like someone in the future or someday in the future to build a centralized product on V3 liquidity. Basically, kind of like DYDX on our liquidity, where basically we are the CLOB. Where a user basically doesn't have to interact with MetaMask wallet to sign every trade transaction, but just has that centralized exchange UX, but all the liquidity is sourced through our markets. That would be awesome.
Don't sleep on the SUSD issuer, guys. The SUSD issuer is going to change how ETH can scale. Just got to put that out there one more time. Shout out to Pyth for brainstorming it. Or designing it. What am I saying brainstorming? Designing the damn thing.
All right, moving on to the next question. This is the last question before closing statements. Also open for group response. Do you anticipate V3 to be more attractive to build protocols on top of? What are the strategies for partnering with other projects in order to launch V3 and use it as a liquidity base?
I'll go first on this one. I think, yes, it should be in theory, right? But the key to the success there is making sure that awareness is out there. And I think today that doesn't really exist outside of the Synthetix ecosystem. You know, like we probably all know about it on the call because we've all been watching the space. But really, when you look at the broader kind of landscape, do people know that they can come and build their new protocols of tomorrow on V3, and do they see the potential in it? I think that's a question we've got to ask ourselves. Then we've got to think about the way that we message that, and then we have to really kind of, as we've seen today in some of the discussions, figure out the role that the Spartan Council is going to play in kind of green lighting new markets or new pools, or which ones they want to own directly. It seems like it's not 100% clear there. And I think really one of the keys that we want is to shift some of the burden that we're seeing today for Synthetix to be kind of like the owner of driving, or Synthetix stakers to be the owners of driving liquidity, and kind of look at that being a shared burden. So some of those partners that as they come on board really see that and get it and understand that that creates major opportunities for them and for us.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in here if it's open question. I basically, I think, you know, from my work as ambassador council on the ambassador council, I could tell you that like the demand to build on top of Synthetix is a lot. Like there's a lot of demand at all time. Like there's so much demand that we cannot meet it all, right? We run into like bottlenecks like synth liquidity and stuff. So I think, you know, getting V3 out there, getting the SUSD issuer out there would allow you know, protocols to integrate in ways that like they couldn't before. And so there'll be all these existing dApps that are going to want to integrate with synths, and they're going to want synth liquidity in their within their protocol. Because like, let's face it, like there isn't a really good stablecoin out there. Like there's DAI and then there's USDC. There's USC and then there's DAI, which is wrapped USDC, right? So like there is a huge demand for synthetic assets that are backed by ETH only, like huge demand for that. So that on its own, there's like, there'll be a lot of protocols I want to integrate with that. But built directly on top of Synthetix, like I think, for the most part, we really want to solidify these partnerships that we already have with teams like Lyra, Quenta. We want them to start to shine after once V3 goes live, because it just shows the utility of Synthetix V3 in general. Once these protocols can optimize on these smart contracts, so I really want to see like Lyra like a renewed partnership there, because they're kind of using GMX now on Arbitrum. They're expressing a lot of disappointment, I would say, in a sense, with Synthetix over the years, and it's understandable. There's been constraints for the protocol in terms of like fees, and it's been restrictive for like traders on top of it. So I can understand where they're coming from, but I think we can renew those partnerships in a good way with V3, and I really just see the demand just going exponential, right? So we just kind of need to. I really want to see V3 get on the wild, operate, and once it is operating, we could there's just so many things that can be built on top of Synthetix that we could eventually integrate with. And on the partnership side, I think the ambassadors are like well positioned to to at least get make an entry with most protocols to do some integrations. They have like line of communication with almost every basically DeFi protocol on Optimism and on Ethereum. So I think we're well positioned in that front. And a lot of protocols actually try to mimic our governance styles, and I get a lot of questions all the time from different projects trying to imitate it, trying to see what works and what doesn't. So I think we're well positioned for these things once V3 goes live.
I think it's also worth noting that one of the important skills that is necessary for a Spartan Council as a gestalt is how to delegate resources where they're going to be most beneficial for the protocol. And this last epoch, one of these, an example of one of these situations was when sitting Spartan Council increased the ambassador council in size from 3 to 2 positions. So in that way, we're already working towards, certainly based on Millie's response, who is one of the ambassadors, we're working well as a protocol to establish partnerships as we speak.
Yeah, I don't feel that we can genuinely say that we're going to go out and onboard partners, because that's not the SC job, and we would be taking credit for the incredible work that Ambassador Council does put forward. I think what we as Spartan Council can do is make sure that we have consistent messaging and people being able to understand and give that and provide that to empower the ambassadors to do what they need to do, and make sure that we're spending our time and priorities on having the tooling, the documentation, the ecosystem support, that when these partners are brought in and sold on this idea by the ambassadors, that we can support them, that they understand how to use Synthetix, that they have the resources that they need, and that they're not churning out frustrated with the protocol. If we think of this as sort of a user acquisition funnel, the ambassadors are that first touch point. They're bringing them in, they're making that conversion happen. We need to make sure it's easy for them to convert, and then we need to focus on the retention. And that's something that we as SC can make sure that we are having the resources allocated in the right places to have that level of support.
Yeah, so in addition to that obvious support Anna mentioned, I think there's a few things we can also do as a Spark Council. That is to provide a carrot for the integrators. As a protocol, we can incentivize. So possibly with the introduction of gauges, we could have a safe set low amount of emissions far below the fees accrued to the SNX token that could be used to direct and bootstrap incentives for liquidity in new pools and markets for those integrators. Maybe even have a small part of those emissions set aside to be controlled and managed by the ambassadors, and they could direct those at specific pools by governance. It's just brainstorming here, but I mean there are definitely ways that we could offer the carrot.
All right, if nobody has anything else to add, we can move on to closing statements. Closing statements. Terra, we'll hear from you first. Give us your pitch.
Well, I hope the last 3 months in which I've been a Spartan Councillor have demonstrated the dedication that I have to the role. I've been following the project avidly, participating in votes, and also attempting to educate newcomers to the community wherever possible. And my intention is to continue that and build on the knowledge that I've so far acquired about V3 and the implications of the transition that is upcoming, and continuing in this role if the SNX holders choose to vote for me. So thank you for everyone who put me in this position, this epoch, and I hope you'll return and carry me forward into the new year.
Thank you, Tara. Jordi, your closing statements, please.
Sure thing. I mean, in general, I think if you have 8 people on a board, it makes sense to have, a diversity there in terms of what people bring to the table, what knowledge base they have. I fully appreciate the people who've been working on this project for a long time, that they've developed a really good understanding of the current ideas that are needed to make V3 a success. I think, my value proposition is that I would bring a different perspective that's much more broader, understands the broader ecosystem extremely well. It's easy in DeFi. I've seen this with many projects that, you start building these like circular use cases where, yeah, this makes sense, but only because this other thing. And then you just kind of start adding, this house of cards. And I think it could be good for a project that is really seeking to build partnerships and find a place in the ecosystem that involves a lot of other broader users and find utility with what it's building. I think I could bring kind of a good level of judgment on making decisions and evaluating kind of options in that direction. So yeah, hopefully I can be useful in that regard. I think some people are pointing out that they feel uncomfortable with somebody not owning any SNX and being a part of the council. So definitely taking that into consideration. So I've started already accruing kind of like a starter bag, which is going to initially be like 1 BIP for the protocol. So 24,000 tokens. And yeah, hopefully that's kind of a sign that I'm serious to want to try to help out.
Thank you, Jordi. Funk, your closing statements, please.
Yeah, hi again. So I think, I'll echo a little bit of what Jordi said in that I think having a wide council with a bit of diversity is a net positive for the protocol. I think really the one that I'd emphasize there is we are a partner today of Synthetix. We do have a kind of shared interest in the success of Synthetix, and that brings a kind of unique view to that, having seen it all from kind of the other side, right? And the struggles that maybe we've sometimes felt in trying to reach the depth of liquidity. And I think really the thing to say alongside that is obviously there is a potential that if there was anything going to the Spartan Council that relates to Keeper or Fixed Forex, I want to make it clear that I would abstain from any of those type of votes or those type of debates.
Thank you, Funk. Millie, your closing statements, please.
Yeah, I would just say, for those that don't know me already, I'm like a DeFi maxi, and I have selfish reasons why I want to see Synthetix achieve success. I want to see a protocol that achieves proper governance, proper incentive alignment amongst token holders and the protocol. I want to see ETH-backed collateral scale in the ecosystem. I shout it from the mountaintops all the time to on crypto Twitter about how we basically piggyback off of off-chain collateral way too much in DeFi, and we incentivize it too much. So I really want to see an ETH-backed, pretty much mainly ETH-backed system scale. I want to see this base like Synthetix achieve maximal decentralization, censorship resistance. Like these are the things I really care about. and I think the Synthetix community always cared about. And I think we should definitely carry these forward. I think for the most part, like there's nuances, right? Like you can't just go from, it's not just A and B, like it's either decentralized or not, it's either censorship resistant or not. There's nuances to it, and I think on the spectrum, we definitely want to be towards the more censorship resistant, more permissionless side, right? But at the same time, maintain a level of functionality and flexibility and upgradability, because I'm not really a fan of like full non-upgradability. Like Uniswap v3 is not upgradable, right? But like it has limitations on what it does. And I think if you want a very functional, very flexible protocol, you need to have upgradability, and it needs to have governance. And to achieve decentralization within governance, that's the tricky part, right? A protocol, just code a smart contract will be decentralized. Like Uniswap smart contract is very decentralized, very permissionless, but that's because it doesn't have governance. Once you add governance in to the picture, then you realize, it becomes very difficult to align incentives well and to scale and to achieve decentralization, right? The blockchain trilemma. So I think to me, that is like the priority. Bring Synthetix to a point of sufficient decentralization, not sufficient actually. I think it's at a kind of a sufficient level of decentralization. I want it to get to maximal decentralization. And then I also want to see the protocol maintain its flexibility in the meantime and be able to adjust the market conditions in the long term. So, that's what you're voting for me. And the other thing you'd be voting for is I'm going to try my best to keep the SUSD name. Definitely not going to let that, let us let go of that easily. SNXUSD is tricky. It doesn't, it's just not that good. I'm going to definitely try and keep SUSD.
All right. Thank you, Millie. Ethernaut, closing statements, please.
So yeah, as a CC, I think the value I have to add right now is to make sure that the new code is secure and as easy to understand as possible for new developers to build on top of Synthetix, for auditors to understand and detect bugs, and yeah, basically use my experience in smart contract security to guarantee that. As a CCC, I think my value is to make sure that everyone has what they need to build this thing. So what would be the value I add as an SC in this regard? I think it would be to represent, to make sure that what the community wants is communicated and understood well by the CCs building V3, and at the same time to make sure I am a good liaison in the technical aspect from the CC team to the Spartan Council itself.
Thank you, Ethernaut. Adam, your closing statements, please.
Sure. So I was going to use my closing statement to go back over those 6 Ps, the profits, preference, partners, placements in epoch, not epic. But I think I'd rather use that time to focus on one really important conversation we were having around the fee and value capture in V3. I don't think it's a given, and I don't think we can ignore it or sweep it under the rug and just assume that we're going to capture that value. It's something that needs to be solved for. At the end of the day, what Synthetix is selling is expertise in collateral-based risk management and the debt pool. That management and that exposure is you're the debt holder. So here, you are the product. You take the risk, you bring the expertise in who you vote for and what collaterals you vote for, and you have to be properly compensated for that risk. We shouldn't overly pay mercenary capital who come into LP in different products. We have a valuable product, and you've heard many candidates say that partners overwhelmingly want it, whether they're paid or not. And so partners having a token drives LPs, like Quenta can drive LPs. We give them fees. We don't need to do that at the expense of stakers. So I think we really need to focus on building out that value proposition that makes sure that the underlying value and risk that Synthetix is selling is properly compensated, and we have the runway to move forward. I hope you vote for me. I hope you've enjoyed what I've brought to the council this past quarter, despite some headbutting times that we all had. But if you don't vote for me, I actually want to encourage you to vote for somebody else. So I want you to look at a newcomer and consider voting for Funk, because I think he has a really good external view, an experience as a partner. He's a bright, engaged person who's less polarizing than me. And while he isn't known all that well around here, I think he's going to bring incredibly valuable insights that are thoughtful to the space. And so if you don't send your votes my way, take a moment to at least consider backing someone new and look at what he's brought forward, because I think it would be a great choice for you at the end of the day.
Very wholesome, Adam. Thank you. Cyberduck, closing statements, please.
All right, guys. As an aspiring council member, my goal is to help make sure V3 is great for everyone, with a focus on expanding non-SNX collateral liquidity that fuels the range of products on top of it, while also enabling modular, scalable, sustainable value accrual for SNX token holders. In being a council member, I'll be committed to writing, discussing, and reasoning on proposals that align with these goals and help ensure the success of Synthetix. Over and out.
All right, thank you. That concludes our call. Thank you to everyone for being here and for your insightful comments on all of these questions. For anyone who couldn't make the call, we're going to be uploading the recording to our podcast so that everyone has a chance to listen and make informed voting decisions for the upcoming epoch. Just a reminder, the Synthetix community governance call is tomorrow at the same time in this channel. Thank you everyone again for being here, and good luck, Spartans.
Bye, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Connor.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.